Hey everybody, this is Todd Hayen here on ManTalk with William MP, coming from the sunny climes of Toronto. Actually is warm today. What you see in the background is not really my house, which I'm sure most of you know. I kind of wish it were, but it isn't. That's the kind of house I'd like, I think. I like the fireplace and the wood and the stone. So anyhow, we are,
it's got some century modern vibes in that little cornice over there.
Yeah. Well, it's a typical California looking house. I used to go to places like this when I was living over there. I think that the door in the background looks like a kind of, shoot, I can't think of his name now. He's the fame. Yeah. My brain is definitely dissolving, folks. So we're going to finish up the Robert Moore interview that we took two other clips from, and we'll just finish it up with this one today. We'll come back to Robert Moore because he's one of our heroes. So he's talking about the Parsifal story, which the other two videos we played, he's referring to that as well, which is the story really of the quest for integration, the Holy Grail and Fisher King and all that stuff is in there. If you're interested in it, check it out. It's a very, very important archetypal story. You can find a pretty good presentation of it in the book titled He. Anyway, it's a little, I mean, he mentions it a couple of times in here, so I thought I'd give it a couple of.
Yeah, that's He by Robert A. Johnson.
Right, Robert Johnson, who's written a bunch of other stuff too. That's very appropriate. There's so many books you guys should be reading if you're interested at all in what we're talking about. It's it's well presented in so many different places that if you like what we've been talking about, you'll love them. I mean, there's so many great books. So let me play the clip. And William, you want to have anything to say before we do that, or you cool?
No. The only thing that came to my mind was that I think at one point you and I were going to create a reading list, and we could give a link and people could access it if they wanted to dive into this stuff. We may have done something like that in the past, I think, but maybe we can do that so that people are gone by these ideas can dive deeper.
That'd be great. Yeah. Yeah, we'll do that. I don't know how we would get. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. Okay, guys, here's the clip.
When we're treating narcissistic personality disorders, one of the things we know about narcissistic personality disorders is they do not yet have the capacity to love. And with it, they do not have the capacity to experience empathy. That is, when they think about you, the only importance any feeling you might have is what it means to their narcissistic gratification. So as a person heals from being ill in that way, they gradually learn how to imagine how another person is feeling. And I thought it was rather elegant in this story. Parsifal's capacity to remember what it was like to be shamed when he is making a decision about what he's going to do with the Duke. And it seems clear from the narrative that he experienced a fairly mature level of empathy there. It's horrific to be shamed. If I'm given a chance not to, then I will not shame this man. I will not shame him.
Huh. I'd love to know what the actual story is, which rendition it is. It's almost like he's talking about Shrek or something.
No, I did it at one point, and hey, look, if anyone knows, please put it in the comments below. Because as I said before, this comes from a full-length workshop that got filmed. It got released very recently, and there's a lot of people that are commenting on this. It's actually really, I feel like it's a huge boon for the community that this got out on the YouTube, because it's so rich.
Yeah, and you can find
was what because even he has that piece of paper in his head. I'm like, I want to read the syllabus,
right?
Because there's so many different versions of the Parsifal that I don't know which one he's talking about. It may be. I mean, I haven't sat down and watched every frame of that full clip. So he made
I think it'd be clear if you did.
Well, I hope to. So, but we can work with what he's giving us here because Parsifal, the capacity to pierce the veil, to see through the veil of illusion, being achieved by this in the tarot. It's the fool. It's like Suzuki's idea of Zen mind, beginner mind. It's Forrest Gump. He doesn't know that he doesn't know, and in his the lack of impediment of self-limiting beliefs propel people into a kind of profound truth. But okay, let me pick at a bone with beloved Robert Moore. He makes this comment about people who are ill in this way. And, it's funny because I'm like struck by that comment and I'm like, oh shit, he's one of these pathologizing types. And then I go, oh, actually, of course he is. And in fact, I use that language all the time because he uses it. But what here, so I don't know that it's necessarily helpful to think of things in terms of illness for a couple of reasons. One, I think that the medical model is too limiting when we think of cause and treatment. I find myself doing it because we're all sort of soaked in the philosophical underpinnings of Western medicine that we'll get trapped into. Where is this coming from and what do we need to do? When, of course, the existential perspective is there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing to be done. That being said, pathology, why do I like that word? Why do I find utility in it? Or why do I find that there's a kind of poetics? Because it's like it's something like what the alchemists call contra naturam. It's not the natural thing. It's not where things need to be. I think of like path is like it's a deviation. It's taken a different path. So I just picked that bone. Now, if there's any people out there that have an alternative perspective, look, other than the fact that I recognize that people who are profoundly mentally ill do benefit sometimes from diagnoses and from. Well,
you just used it.
Medical understanding.
Severely mentally ill. Well, one of the things we were taught in archetypal school was that one of the wonderful things about having your primary modality being archetypal psychology or transpersonal or transcendent, whatever you want to call it, imaginal psychology, is that there isn't as great a tendency to pathologize it. And the illness, to me, at least in how I work with my clients, and I'm sure you do the same thing to some degree, is unconsciousness, that there are systems that were put into place through trauma, typically in childhood, that are operating systems or systems designed to avoid hurt or avoid loss of control, which essentially means you lose safety and whatever. Right. And those systems are put in place and they're in the unconscious, and they reside in the unconscious and they function from there, but they certainly cause behavior. So if somebody is considered a narcissist and say is diagnosed as an MPD, the actual disorder that the DSM describes and has criteria for, and let's say somebody fits that and they're diagnosed as a usual conventional psychologist, psychotherapist is going to say they have a pathology, that they're ill. Where in actuality, they just have a system, unconscious system that isn't fully integrated, that causes them to behave a particular way in order to protect them and make them feel safe. Yeah. So, we could call it an illness, but we're all ill.
It's not that I necessarily even, if there's utility in it, I'm a radical pragmatist. I'll go with whatever works. I find often though that what I will do in a clinical setting is more move into. It's funny, I use the word clinical, right? There it is. But in that setting, I tend to use the word defense, because defense is like, okay, there's a reason for it. It's being deployed for a reason. There's no reason.
It's definitely being deployed for a reason, but it could be it could be offense as well, though, couldn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, we run into a lot of problems when we get into the medical model like the DSM, because you look at the DSM definition of narcissism, and I mean all the definitions are just unidimensional. They only talk about like what it is that it's like at one level of disorganization. You know, this is in contrast to the PDM, where you look at
why don't we say what those are?
The PDM is the psychodynamic diagnostic manual. If I'm
right.
saying that correctly. That's Nancy McWilliams and the other guy who edited
the other guy. That's good enough.
The other guy, the Italian guy. Shout out to him. But yeah, I mean, the way that they look at personality structure is they look at it multidimensionally, and so they'll say, okay, here are the different personality styles that are from normal to neurotic to borderline to psychotic, and that actually gives you two axes to work on, which I find important. But it also you can get into the multitude of ways in which a person can be, for example, narcissistic, the multitude of ways in which a person can be borderline. Because the psychodynamic people, I mean, if you look at, for example, the understanding of borderline, you know, there's great people like, you know, whoever wrote the Understanding the Borderline Mother. You know, she does a great job of identifying. She's got four. She's got the hermit, the witch, the waif, the queen, and that's really helpful because, you know, when we look at these things unidimensionally, one thing is that we conflate a healthy level of narcissism with its pathological, you know, dysfunction, and we don't, and it's hard to see it in when it hides in like covert narcissism, for example. The DSM, as Nancy McWilliams points out quite accurately, is only sort of looking at grandiose narcissism, which is an easy one to see. So, you know, and I think also in terms of dealing with the concept of pathology, they understand that these things deployed at a healthy level can be functional. Like everyone has a functional level of even borderline, you know, that they have a capacity to, you know, split people off and see people in black and white when it serves. But as it becomes more and more unconscious, more and more it progressed and unattained, it leads to psychosis. So that's my sort of jumping off point from this.
There's you know, and I think this is an extension of what you're saying. There's also certain traits, say borderline narcissistic traits, that can be present to an extreme, you know, on a scale, if we have to make a metric out of it, in some people, and then non-existent in others that would still be considered dealing with a narcissistic paradigm, you know. Narcissistic traits. I had a client, a woman who was so disconnected from the empathic awareness of her husband. There was like no sense of anything that, I mean, it's one of those typical situations where if you go down the narcissist list, you know, it's like always is right, always wins every argument. Anytime the husband ever had anything to say that he was complaining about, it was always his fault. She never owned anything. I mean, all the way down the list. Yet this woman was so capable of showing empathy and love and care for other people, for her children, for whatever. She was definitely capable of empathy, like to a degree that was like way off the scale. Is she a narcissist? I mean, what would she be called? You know, what would she be diagnosed? She doesn't fit the criteria, but boy, she certainly fitted in a lot of ways. But then, if anybody's familiar with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, whatever the hell it is, DSM, one of the strangest things about it is that it gives a list of criteria for each, in the personality cluster, for each of the things that make somebody. And if you don't get 9 out of the 13 or whatever, then you're not considered a narcissist, you know. And it's like, where does that come from? I mean, again, it's that medical model thing where if you walk in and if you have a rash on your face and it itches and then you've got a sore arm or whatever, okay, that means you have this disease. And yeah, that could be pretty accurate.
Diagnose and treat. And so it's
right.
Need to diagnose and treat. It doesn't, I mean, it's funny because, you know, if it's so medical, I mean, it's just focused on the fever. You know, you don't go to a doctor with a fever and they go, here, take this fever reducer. Oh, you're at 36.4. You're good. See you later. You go, where the fuck is this fever coming from? Do you have an infection? What's happening on the inside? But
it's a symptom treater.
Yeah, the DSM, and I think that probably motivated by its need to medicalize the human experience in order to be legitimate, which is part of, that started with Freud. I mean, he had that whole hang up. But it's also, it serves the insurance companies because they're great, cool.
And the pharmaceuticals.
As long as we can reduce your symptomology down to a manageable amount, we won't pay for anything further. They don't do that with anything other than psychiatry, which is interesting. But yeah, and it serves a purpose, but it's just not a particularly robust assessment guide, and I think it leads people astray. I think one of the trouble that I see is that the conflation of narcissism in people, even when it comes to just grandiose coping, and how that will be conflated with NPD. Even now, in what appears to be a kind of epidemic of narcissism in our culture, especially with the rise of social media, I think the numbers are still within 1% to 6% of the population of NPD. But if you look online and how many people are talking about narcissism and how many people are calling each other narcissists and how many people, in private conversations refer to people as narcissists, you would suspect the number.
The culture, the masses in the culture don't have a clue as to what I hope nobody explains to anyone on social media what borderline is, because then people will be throwing that one around like crazy, and nobody understands what that means. And it's nice because the word is ambiguous. It's not about being borderline, but people like to think that's what it is. Oh, you're right on the edge of being psychotic or being a weirdo or whatever, so that means you're borderline.
Well, but that is what it means. So that's
originally it did. Originally it was a borderline to dementia precox, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. But let me clarify that. So it can be very confusing. I remember that you could. This is the thing that you can latch onto. You can be a borderline, and you have to go back and sort of parse out the history of the diagnosis. Theodore Milan does a great job of that in Personalities and Their Disorders, going through the whole history of it. He's like Nietzsche. He's like, he goes through the history. He does a genealogy of it. But okay, so come back to the PDM. So remember, the PDM is looking at dimensionality. And so there's 4 levels of disorganization: healthy, neurotic, borderline, and psychotic. And borderline is in between neurotic. And so that means that your reality testing is slightly impaired, and so there are moments when you're in and out of reality, and you can be a narcissist that's on the borderline, you can be a dependent that's on the borderline. It's when you get to the point where you are sometimes in reality and sometimes not. So borderline, normally borderline personality disorder is only really kind of like visible at that level. You can be neurotically borderline, a lot of people are. But it starts to really become clear when it hits that almost psychotic level. Anyone dealing with borderline clients, patients, family members, loved ones will tell you one of the crazy making aspects of the borderline is their impaired reality testing, so that they'll be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you go, 5 minutes ago you were in reality with me and now you're not. Now narcissists too, because on the one hand they may have moments in which their estimation of their greatness seems within a reasonable range. Like they might say like, hey, I can't open this jar. I can hear you do it. I'm incapable of doing it. And then 2 minutes later, they're telling you that you're the greatest jar opener in the world. No one ever opened jars like them. And someone should do a documentary about how well they open jars, right?
Now, are you talking about borderline, or are you talking
about narcissism? That's what I mean by
Yeah.
narcissists, right? And so because when it degenerates to that level, when you're that wrapped up in that defense, reality.
Yeah, thanks for that. Anyway, yeah, we're not talking about borderlines, but we can. I mean, that's fine, but I don't want to go into I don't want to go into that around. That's all we're going to talk about. That's like the biggest pile of I don't know. I think borderline is first, and psychology is being the biggest pit, and narcissism is second. Although narcissism is more popular to talk about from a popular point.
Neither seek therapy, but I think right.
Well, borderlines do.
They do. They seek it actually more often than narcissists.
Yeah, sure they do, because they want you to know there's something wrong with them.
Yeah. But I've only had one or two clients for whom narcissism was the core defense that they were.
And they're usually, for me, they're usually men who believe their wife is a narcissist. So that's why they come to therapy, because they can talk about her and say that she's a problem.
Yeah,
they're not talking about themselves usually. And it's one of the key traits. Now, going back to what Moore is saying, I think he's focusing on probably the prime problem with the modern narcissist, which is essentially a lack of empathy, which actually indicates an inability to love, and that's from what my therapist Adam Crabtree, who's brilliant, says is the different. There's two types of loves. There's the eros love, and then there's the agape love. And the agape love is love that's presented to the other with no expectation of return. And where eros is presented to the other with an expectation of a return of love. Both types of love need to be present in a healthy relationship. There should be a completely selfless love, which is what we would call unconditional, or as well as an eros love, as well as looking out for the self to say, well, I deserve this, not to slip into a codependent relationship with somebody or whatever it might be. Now, what he says when he says it's the lack of empathy, I don't think you can have agape love if you don't have a sense of empathy. And that's the key thing for me, at least as a practitioner, the key thing of determining if somebody has a pathological, as we were talking about, an illness that's related to the word narcissism or narcissist.
Yeah, a psychotic level of disorganization.
Yeah. Okay. That's definitely a definite way to put it. Anything else, especially in our culture, can be very easily confused with ambition, with grandiosity, which I don't think is necessarily a pathology. It's like
no, it's a coping mechanism, but yeah, it's not.
Well, it can be a coping mechanism, absolutely, and that's where it's on the borderline of being a pathology. But people that are highly ambitious, that have big dreams and whatever. I mean, especially in our materialist culture, that's considered a good thing.
Well, sure. I mean, and I think ambition is necessary for human evolution. No? But he one thing I loved about what he said was he says they're not yet capable.
I know. I love that too. That's the therapist in him.
That's the therapist in him. No
always hope.
Language, but really keeping that hope.
Right.
Breathing some air into that ember of hope.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy, both borderline and narcissism, because they can cultivate hopelessness in people who are dealing with it, hopelessness in people who are relating to it, and certainly hopelessness in practitioners that are attempting to navigate it in their clients or in their patients or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he's talking, here again about this, the blunted or kind of broken feeling function. And it's interesting too, when you're talking about the different forms of love, I'm like, well, yeah, agape versus eros. But one of the things that I think the word love, so you'll notice if you've been in contact with narcissists, and we all have, that one function of love is not broken in them, and that's philos, because many narcissists are connoisseurs. Now, maybe their connoisseurship is a little distorted, right? Because it'll be like, oh, I'm going to serve you this wine. It's the greatest wine you've ever had. You can't believe how good this wine tastes. I went to this winery. You never believe how beautiful this winery is and the wine they produce. And I bought all these bottles, and you'll be lucky to have some. That's philos. And I think okay, so yeah, they're aggrandizing themselves in the discovery of it or the presentation of it to you, but they genuinely also have the capacity. They have an intact feeling function, and to say, wow, this is really good. I really appreciate the quality of this wine. Now you look at someone who is like a hopeless depressive, someone that's like alexithymic. You give them a great glass of wine, and they go, I don't know what the fuck is this. It tastes like wine. That's
a really good point. I never thought of that before, because it is true that anyone that I've known that people call a narcissist, or seems to be, has that capacity or has that experience in their personality set. They're connoisseurs. They appreciate things that are well made. They appreciate, and you know, a lot of it is because they want to be associated with it. You know, they have the nice cars, they have nice clothes, because they want to say, well, look at me. But it's more than that. It's more complex than just this is for my benefit. Because they appreciate it, I think independently they appreciate it, even with nobody else around. They like a good glass of wine or driving a nice car.
And I think, you know, it's like you think about Trump, and he has this. You're right. He has this sort of this pull to be associated with gold. His name is written in gold. Trump Towers, and I love that he refers to the Israelis have the Iron Dome and have the Golden Dome. He loves gold, and you're right. I think he wants to be associated with, because I think he wants to be, you know, thought of as this rare, precious, valuable, expensive, gold standard, the best. You know, that's what he's looking for in there. But I think he also probably has a legitimately deep, kind of passionate love for things made of gold. You know, you probably
you know, and I'm going to say this and
show you all the great things of gold, and he'll say something interesting about it.
And I think you'll disagree with this because you've said it before. And I used to be totally on this side of it, but I heard Jordan Peterson's little speech about Trump, and there were certain things that he said that I went, yeah, you know, I don't think I'd classify Trump as MPD.
No, he's not. He is.
Yeah, well, you've always said he has grandiosity, as a grandiose narcissism.
He has grandiose narcissism, but I don't think I mean, one of the ways that we can obviously preclude him from a diagnosis like NPD is that it's clear that he's not completely devoid of empathy. He loves his kids. He loves his kids.
Yeah, well, good. I mean, and you know what? I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that because again, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about narcissism, and we're talking about MPD. Yeah. MPD is a clinical diagnosis of a personality pathology. Narcissism is not.
Grandiose narcissism doesn't make a distinction between covert and other flavors of narcissism.
Right.
But right.
And, you know, I just said a minute ago that I have a hard time with this idea of grandiosity even being classified as a pathology, a psychological pathology.
You know, it's difficult because the transpersonal purview, one that you and I are both, you know, entrenched in, doesn't want to see things in pathologizing terms.
Right.
Wants to transcend that, and that's a good thing. But you got to look at somebody like David Rico. How to Be an Adult, a book that I can't stop recommending to people because it's so fucking good. 120 pages of pure gold. And like you read it like Nietzsche, one phrase at a time and digest. He does an incredibly good job of understanding that when in the process of maturation, you need to build ego strength. We need ego psychology. And we need that in order to create a foundation for the ability to transcend into the transpersonal. And we can't bypass it. I mean, I'm not, you know, saying that it's a huge problem, but there is still a problem in the transpersonal where there's this desire based on fundamental philosophical presumptions in the transpersonal mindset of wanting to get over it, but I want to transcend it. And Rico's like, you got to work through it, and you got to work through it slowly and systematically and methodically. And I think for a lot of people, and they don't want to hear this, is you have to abandon the spiritual until you've healed the ego enough to really have a solid ground to bring it in. Because if you start going into that spiritual stuff too early, the compulsion to bypass, the compulsion to
of course, I mean the ego capture
grandiosity to your, you know, there's so many spiritual narcissists in.
Well, the spirituality that's like a wall to stand behind, and the ego just loves it. It grabs a hold of that virtue signaling and uses it. It captures it. So absolutely,
positivity is so fucking seductive, man. I just want to live in love and light, and I don't think anyone's going to do me harm.
Well, you know, you're describing one of the it's one of the major problems with the whole liberal concept is this virtue, this believing, well, we're good and we love, and you know, the conservatives are hateful, they this, they that, and that idea of the positive mindset, the good mindset, and then they turn around and hate Trump the way they hate him and Trump supporters and whatever this visceral hate that comes out of it. It's just like
Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah, right. Which is very true.
DSM-6 will have to include that one. The DSM-6 will have to include Trump derangement syndrome.
That's right. Maybe it will.
Population to have made its way in. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really important. You know, when you look at Dostoevsky, I mean, he does a great job of creating an understanding of the human experience that's transcendent, but lives within the boundaries of chemistry and physics. And I think one of the great benefits of that kind of view is that you never lose the anchoring in reality, and you're not ever going to be, or you won't be nearly as susceptible to naivete. So when you leave, when you move into things beyond the possibilities outside of what we know to be the laws of chemistry and physics, when you cut that cord and you move into truly transpersonal understandings, things that are greater than the scientific mindset, you're at risk of being naive and falling for things and being gullible because there's no way to test them in the way that they are on the the scientific level, which does a good job at ego psychology. We can apply a lot of scientific techniques to that. We can apply them to transpersonal as well. I mean, that was Jung's school thing, is that he was very systematic. He had hypotheses and he would test them in his own way and create evidence. But no, I think it's as much as we are struggling with how to reconcile these two, the transcendent, transpersonal, mythical, and the ego psychology, I think we have to work hard to be anchored in both. And one of the things that I think is really important to offer as a transpersonal practitioner is to be unapologetically grounded in ego psychology and really invested in it and trust it and do the work to not get lost in the transcendence of it, because it's very tempting and it's very seductive, especially when you're living in a world in which you are awake to horrors.
Yeah.
Transcend that, get me out of here. My fucking hair's on fire. I mean, especially, June 6, 2025. Anyone who's paying any attention to what's happening in the world can be forgiven for wanting to get the fuck out of here like their hair's on fire.
Yeah. So if you were given the task to treat, or let's put it this way, let's say, if we have anybody listening to this that suspects for whatever reason that they have a problem with empathic connection or with empathy, what, and because Moore mentions this, he says something about, I can't remember what he said, but it's something about teaching someone or someone learning to become more empathic. What would that entail? Yeah,
so I think if I hear him correctly, what he's describing as a healing for the narcissistic or grandiose pathology, as he would put it, is connection to our own experience of shame, which anyone caught in a narcissistic defensive pattern or personality type that leans that direction will know, because that's what they're defending against.
It's definitely, yeah, but do they know it though?
So I mean, okay, so what would that look like as a clinical approach? I mean, look, narcissism is going to be really fucking hard to work with from a therapeutic standpoint, because you're trying to navigate around this very fragile bubble that if you unintentionally burst, if you come too directly, the alchemical pot will boil over, and your client will run, and they'll feel humiliated and angry, and you have to start all over again. They will. That's what the alchemists say. If it burns, you have to clean the pot and start all over again. So we have to be very careful. So it's a very slow process, but I think what he's saying is to can you guide people in the direction of being able to tune into their own sense of shame, and say, oh, you look, when we behave in this way, other people feel shame, and you felt shame. Oh yeah, I know, I felt shame. Right. Well, so that person is feeling what you felt in that moment. And I think what he's hoping in that, if I'm hearing him correctly, is that he's trying to bring them back and anchor them into the one, thing that they do know well, which is that feeling, to see if they can't extend that then.
What feeling do they know well?
Shame.
So a narcissist knows the feeling of shame?
Yep. Because that's the jumping off point.
I'm curious to know where that, I would say, and maybe I must not be getting what you're saying right, because I would say that's the one thing narcissists don't know is shame.
That's that they're doing everything they can to avoid feeling again.
Right. Well, they definitely are avoid feeling it, because that's their whole MO, is to avoid feeling shame. So that's why they're always right. That's why they can't ever, own anything in an argument or whatever. But I think, and educate me if I'm wrong, but I think that's more of an unconscious process of the avoidance of shame. I don't know if consciously they're, oh gee, I got to avoid that, I don't want to feel that way. I don't know, is that what you're saying, or are you saying that
what you mean is, and I think you're right, that someone who is at a high level of narcissistic defense and who's been in that defense for many years has probably forgotten what it's like to deeply successful in deploying the defense. But and again, I'm just guessing at what Moore's trying to get at, is that I think he's trying to say, but at the core of this, they're going to remember it. Look, show me someone who is lost in a narcissistic defense, and I'll show you, especially if it's grandiose narcissism, I'll show you someone who felt undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying this from the perspective of the therapist.
Or anyone who's trying to navigate, like if you're in a relationship with someone who you fear is narcissistic, or if you're narcissistic. Well,
yeah, that would be a hard one, because that's usually the object of avoiding shame, is the partner or somebody that is close to them. That's the reason why therapists are really the only hope in creating that. But I totally get it. I get what you're saying. But our work, just like it always is to open up something that has been covered up for a long time. And so if whatever it was that created the narcissistic complex or whatever is the thing that all the effort is made to cover and to not feel. So whatever that is, and that's the work. But let's say somebody doesn't go to a therapist, but just gets a sense that they're non-empathic. They're not going to necessarily know, unless they watch this, then they will know that, it has to do with shame. When was the last time I felt that? When I was 4 years old or whatever it might be. My own feeling of inadequacy or whatnot. Is if I'm an individual watching this and I have a sense, maybe I am kind of narcissist. Everybody's calling me a narcissist. What does that mean to me? I'm not going to go to therapy for whatever reason. What can I do to investigate this more for myself?
Yeah, it's a good question. So
because I don't have an answer to it, so I'm referring to you.
I give you a personal and a kind of relational way. So I notice in myself a tendency toward aggrandizement, a difficulty with empathy. Fuck, what do I do? I think the first and most important thing is to recognize that this is a defense.
Okay, good.
And that you didn't ask to be stuck in this defense.
Okay.
And that this is coming from a place in you that felt hopelessly devalued.
Okay.
If we take a Freudian approach, this is like a childhood event from the past in which you felt devalued, has now created a defense mechanism in you to overvalue yourself, to try and lift you up. The narcissism is there to defend against the feeling of worthlessness and hopelessness. And so it's actually been keeping you alive. I mean, and most people will understand this, that the first thing to recognize about these things is not how much of a problem they're causing in your life, and to allow yourself to be flooded with a sense of shame, or humiliation, or regret, but to say, why was it there? What is it protecting that's sacred? And to always come back to you, I constantly remind clients of this. You didn't ask for this shit.
Right.
Nobody asked to be wounded in a way that had to be defended with aggrandizement that then puts you in this very precarious position and turns everyone off around you. You didn't ask for that shit.
Mm-hmm.
The one more key thing, I mean, if we look at trauma theory, really what we want to look at is where is the charge being held and how do we discharge it, right? And usually it's a defense, and in the somatic and bioenergetic work that I do, it's a defense in the body. It's body armor that's defending against the fear of falling into the somatic experience of shame. When you can titrate into that and feel that it's okay to allow shame to be in the body, right? Then we kind of we take the energy away, we take the power away from that thing to scare the shit out of us. And this is the classic example of a child that's terrified of a monster in the closet, the shadows, and then you flip on the light, and once the light of awareness comes in, it evaporates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We look at this thing and it evaporates. But we have to learn how to be able to titrate into that feeling of shame, allow it to be in the body, to disconnect it from story, and allow it to dissipate. And the great thing in somatic work is when you can learn how to be in the body in a way that allows the energy to move through you. Not only is it a relief, oh, it moved through me, I'm not carrying it anymore, but it's also an empowerment of, holy shit, I could do that. I have control over this. Mm-hmm. When I feel that happening in my body, there are techniques that I can deploy that can help me to move it through. And now I'm less afraid of it. Now I don't have to run from it, because if it's there, I know it's not going to overwhelm me. And I also know how to help myself move through it quickly. And so I think that's the core of it.
Well, it is. I mean, and that's essentially the core to everything. Because these unconscious complexes that affect our behavior, whether it's narcissism, borderline, depression, anxiety, whatever, are fears of annihilation. That as a child you were always on the edge of being unsafe, because you can't take care of yourself. That's if your parents let you off in the woods somewhere, you would die. And so those just like what you're describing with the monster in the closet, the adulthood, maturity, integration, consciousness is the light that essentially shines on the trauma, or the effect of the trauma, not the trauma itself. Yeah, what was I going to say? There was something you said that made me think.
The second piece is that, like, how to work with it in a clinical context, and I can give you a little nugget on that one. I had one recently that I think was good.
Okay.
So, client presents with this issue of, oh my God, I keep bringing conversations back to me, and I can see in the body there's this like frustration, embarrassment, shame. Fuck, I recognize that I'm doing it now. Like you say something to me and immediately I'm making it about me. So we're holding this and talking. And she starts talking about, oh, you know what? This is like, I got this from my family, because that's what they do all the time. All they do is talk about themselves. It's fucking it rubbed off on me. I'm mirroring them. And I go, hold on a minute. Wait, let's just stay there for a second. Come back to that. Now imagine, you're in a family system in where no one can get a word in edgewise because everyone's talking about yourself, and yet you need to be seen. So what do? She's like, oh, right. I have to force the conversation back to me in order for me to get an adequate amount of seen, because everyone else is so busy seeing themselves. I mean, we went further into that, but you can see how it's like, oh, right. So is it really about you being selfish? So many people are afraid of it. Like, they don't even want to look at this tendency to occupy a conversation because they're afraid that the end of it is selfishness. Well, if the end of it is selfishness, it means the true definition of selfishness is that you actually will take something from other people and not care that it hurts them. But the
right.
running from it, that you run from it is because you care, which means that you're not selfless. Now, you may be coming across that way. You may be even acting in that way. But at your core, you care. A truly selfless person is a person who's in a desert with another person as a liter of water. You take that liter of water, you drink the entire thing, and hand them the empty bottle, and don't feel any kind of problem about the fact that they're going to die.
Well, isn't that sociopathic? I mean, we're talking about another,
Sure. I mean, I'm amplifying it in order for it to be clearly.
Right,
but yes, it's sociopathic. But that's truly what it means, that you really don't care, or that you have so little care that you would do it. Now, most people, good-hearted people that are not lost to sociopathy, think of that and go, "Oh, there's no fucking way I would do that."
Yeah.
I mean, look, under duress, if you're like, let's say that you're literally gone crazy, you've broken from reality, you're hallucinating because of dehydration and breakdown. You might get to the point where you actually...
that's a different thing. I mean, the analogy you gave is you have to confine it.
That's you under extreme pressure, and everyone.
It's not the same thing.
Comes out under pressure, and I'm like, the right amount of pressure will bring out your true character, and enough pressure will bring out something in you that's not you. That's just primitive and totally based on existence and survival, and completely disconnected from your sense of self.
But this goes back to just, I mean, what you just said is very informing, and it goes back to my comment about the client that I had, that only expressed this lack of empathy when she was in arguments with her husband.
Yeah.
And because he was the threat to that shield from shame. Mm-hmm. That, her kids or animals or other friends that she could love freely and have empathic responses to freely because they weren't threats to her. They weren't capable of breaking down the armor she had that protected her from the shame. Right. That could be because she had an issue with her father, that the father could have been the one, the masculine represented, embodied in her father, could have been the one that shamed her or whatever. It's like that's a pretty direct relationship, but I think that happens quite a bit. So narcissism, is there a narcissism toward partners or a narcissism toward the world? Mm-hmm. If we look at somebody like Donald Trump and what everybody says is his narcissism, is that just because he's grandiose and thinks he's the greatest and has no problem telling everybody that? Or is he actually incapable of accessing his shame? I don't think so. If you ever hear reports of people that actually spend time with him, you don't get that from the report. It's almost like his narcissism, or what people are calling narcissism, is a tool he uses in order to get what it is that he's after, which most narcissists are looking for something to get. Whether it be deals with other countries, which he's doing now, or deals with banks and real estate, which he did in his early time in life. Mm-hmm. He uses all that as a tool in order to accomplish his goals.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
it's a little different.
It is, but obviously, talking about Trump derangement syndrome, why is it that we get so many people that are adamant that he must be the prime example? Oh, he's the best narcissist that was ever narcissistic. Yeah. So when we're harboring annihilation fantasies about something that appears to us to be an existential threat, Trump is an existential threat to liberalism. Right. So let's see it. If Trump wins, liberalism will die.
Right.
They don't realize he's also liberal in many ways. But so when you have an annihilation fantasy, what's required is for othering. If I don't make you other, I can't kill you. If I can't think of you as not human, I won't be able to slit your throat. So NPD is, we can other you in that way. We can pathologize. Mm-hmm. We can, you're a monster. And if you're a monster, then I'm justified in annihilating you. Mm-hmm. Right? And then, because they're harboring this under an ego structure that thinks of itself as being the defender of the weak and good-willed and whatever, then it becomes projective.
Right. Right. Did you by chance read my article that came out this week on Off Guardian?
No.
About you should check it out because you inspired a lot of it, because it's something you said a bunch of weeks ago about this projection that you're talking about now. And it's it's on Off Guardian, and it's I can't remember the title of it. It's like it's something about the liberal mindset, with the Trump derangement thing and why it's so focused on hate. Yeah. And it's all about projection. It goes into that.
annihilation fears. And I mean,
yeah.
reasons that people think like, oh, it's Donald Trump that's whipped the liberals into a frenzy, and it's like, no, it's the collapse of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Because
well, ultimately,
have now reached a kind of a level of undeniable reality. Like, my God, we don't have a functioning Democratic Party. He's won, and then that just triggers more. This threat needs to be annihilated, and we need to continue to devalue, diminish, make him crazy, make him, and they're going out of their minds trying to justify their annihilation fantasy toward him.
Yeah, and literally going out of their minds.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a pretty scary thing to see on a mass scale.
They're terrifying
like that.
I mean, when I think, speaking of empathy, when I try to put myself in their position, I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
The people that I see that are that would qualify, for this Trump derangement syndrome, they're not having fun, man.
No, my God, no.
Terrifying.
No.
They're scared. They're confused. They're dysregulated, and they're in these echo chambers. And now there's so many what they think of as legitimate sources of authority. Are validating this, which just fuels it. The New York Times says it, and the New Yorker says it, and the NPR says it, and this says it, and there's just no hope in sight. And I think it's a terrible, terrible, terrible way to be in the world right now. And my heart goes out to people that are stuck in that, man.
Yeah.
I don't have any need to annihilate them. I tell you that much.
No.
Nor do I have any compulsion to try and persuade them out of it. A lot of people.
Well, you can't.
Right. They get stuck in that, and they get lost in these debates with people. They can't understand why they lose the debate every time. These people won't listen to reason. It's like, man, you're trying to argue with a cat that's scared in the corner. It's got its claws.
Yeah.
Up.
Right.
Good luck.
Right.
What you do with a cat that's like stuck in the corner with its claws up is that you sit quietly beside it and don't move,
or throw a bucket of water on it.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be the knee-jerk reaction, which is exactly what you just described. But
I'm curious though, how did you handle this case that you're describing, this couple with the projection and the narcissism that was directly toward the husband?
This is the usual stuff, trying to get into childhood psychodynamic perspectives. I've only seen them a few times, and we haven't really gotten into the work as a couple. It's more the individual sessions and just kind of seeing, what's going on with her. And it's a little bit of a composite. It's not necessarily one person. There's I kind of turned it into something more than it was for the sake of talking about it. I don't want to identify her.
No, I was just acutely aware of the fact. I think you and I need to be as careful as possible. I don't think there's any way to identify, but the thing with competition.
Oh, no. I don't think we get close to that.
I don't think so, no. But we just out of respect, I don't want anyone to think that we're not being mindful of competition. Oh,
yeah. And there's I don't know and this isn't something to talk about, just curious. I don't know if there's an actual ethical rule about it, but what I've always been focused on is to keep identifiers out. If I talk about a situation, I will make it up to a certain degree to keep identifiers out. But I can guarantee you,
ruling things out, right? So it's like if you, the way that it was, I was taught was that but if you only have a certain number of female clients, and one of the clients you're talking about is one of them, and you know it's not the other one, they can kind of rule it out. And anyway, these rules are in place to protect the sanctity of the container of the therapeutic.
Well, but there's a difference there too. There's a problem there. What I was saying is that I would bet you money that if my client watched this, they would know I was talking about that. So I'm not sure if that is a breach. Very well could be. And certainly what you just said about protecting the container, there's no legal or regulation board that pays any attention to that. That's a archetypal Jungian transpersonal whatever concept of protecting the container. Like, I had a supervisor when I first started that said he didn't even want me to look people up on the internet if there was somebody that had any kind of notoriety that would be on the internet. He said no information comes to you about this client except what's in that space. No information from anywhere else is allowed in.
Yeah.
And okay, nor out. Okay, obviously. So even if I completely disguise a client and I talk about that client outside of that space, I'm breaching that frame. Yeah. And you don't have to believe that. I mean, that's not really, whoops, I just destroyed my illusion.
It's right. These punctures, you're narcissistic.
Right. Exactly. This is my narcissistic illusion here.
Bubble that was hermetically sealed, like your
yes.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I understand where that thinking comes from, and I do believe in the sanctity of the container and defending it. But I think that there is a lot of room for permeability that is lost in the more fundamental, medical model and otherwise. There's this kind of hermetically sealed, clean rooms, sterility, these fundamentalisms about never, mustn't, shouldn't. Let it be permeable. I mean, that's the existential thing. And if you look at someone like Irvin Yalom, a master of existential psychotherapy, his perspectives on these things are radically different.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah.
And he's, he's for all intents and purposes proven his approach to be incredibly effective. So it's not as if that's the only way to do things. I think I get it. Like I'm always a little bit curious about if I get outside information. I have been tempted to look people up. I'll get a name.
Oh, I actually, I just said all that. I don't follow it. I actually don't believe it. I understand where it comes from, but you can't be a teacher. Somebody that's really following that wouldn't even be doing what we're doing here. It's like, because we're informed by our clients and we're talking about what we're informed by. So we're breaking the container there as well, much more subtly, of course. But no, I think that I believe the focus should be protecting the confidentiality of a client, not necessarily the container. I get it. I understand what it means, but I if I get information from say somebody's mother, like a 50-year-old client whose mother writes to me to tell me how bad her son is, I will read it, but I will make sure my client sees it as well. Sure. And I share it with them. So in that sense, I don't let things from the outside come in unless they're shared in the container.
Yeah, the permeability of the work, I think, is a good way to make it more robust. I think there's a fragility in hermetic sealed kind of
absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
It's like it won't. It's the test tube, the sample that won't survive on the outside. I don't like the fragility of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
that's a really good way to put it.
Within community, I mean, okay, maybe it's a projection because I'm sort of characterologically open. I don't really ever feel too much of anything about sharing a lot of information about me. There are certain things, of course, that I wouldn't, but I find it liberating. I find it like,
I'm like that too.
Knows that, I pissed my pants or whatever. Like, okay, well, whatever. You're a human being, and now I don't have to walk around worrying about being found out.
Yeah. Do you ever tell people you're a lizard, a shape-shifting lizard? You don't share that? Yeah.
No, being exposed as a globalist. Isn't that what lizards are in your mind, a globalist?
Well, I'm not sure if I agree with David Icke and his lizard theory, but
so fucking
I think metaphorically he's right.
Lizard people are real.
Well, yeah, literal. I mean, that's what's always so funny about these things, because they really are literalizing. Like if you make evil people a lizard from another planet, then you don't have to relate to them at all. That you can just wipe them off the face of the earth and kill them. I mean, it's easier to kill a bunch of lizards than
which is why the minute I hear someone talking about these elites and they're like real lizards, I'm like, the conversation's over for me, because I'm not in the business of othering people. I don't find that helpful. And
that's exactly what it is. It's othering people, and it's a great defense. Talk about virtue signaling. Well, they're just lizards. And the hell with them.
And what are you? If they're lizards, then what are you? You're
you're a human being.
They're in the muck, the primordial sort of muck. And what are you? Some sort of angelic, transcendent kind of ethereal being?
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I'm not anybody out there that likes David Icke. I know
we lost them. They're gone.
Well, I think he's interesting. And you know, maybe I think of his ideas more metaphorically, but I think he's tapping into something that is important, and I certainly believe all that he says about education and all that shit. But
yeah,
anyway.
let's not. We shouldn't do the left the disservice of casting them in that light, because the right, man, Jesus.
Oh my God, we got a lot of good stuff.
Wonderful. I mean, they have a long history of othering. I don't know, homosexuals, liberated women, whatever. But no, they have a thing now where, you know, these generally right-leaning, like anti-vaxxers have this thing now about, oh, I won't be in contact with people who've been vaccinated. They got spike proteins flying off of them, and if I go anywhere near them, it'll pollute the sanctity of my pure being. And I love them because I'm, you know, toxically positive, but I'll keep my distance from them.
Toxically
Get the fuck out of here. Look, I don't even know.
Well, if you're actually that concerned about your physical health that you won't stay with somebody or be around somebody who's vaccinated because of shedding, you've got you're in a dream world, because everything's shedding on you. It's like the air, the food you eat. I mean, everything is toxic. It's like you're not going to save your physical body. And it's funny, once again, there's that extreme. It's like, well, I'm a very spiritual person, so, you know, God will take care of me. My immune system will take care of me and whatnot. And okay, but at the same time, I'm terrified that somebody's been vaccinated and they're going to shed on me. Yeah, it gets all.
It won't protect you, but it'll protect me, not you. Me.
What?
Well, God. I mean, the idea that like God will protect me from.
Oh yeah. Well,
that I'm under the golden dome of God.
You don't want to go there with this, because I'll start into it. It's complicated. Put it that way.
You're a narcissistic view.
Right. Well, we should stop. This is a good place. Okay, everybody.
All right, everybody. It's been fun.
All right. It sure has been. And we will see you next week. And please comment. Please let us know you're out there. If you watch this at all, there's a lot of you that are. Could you please leave a comment? Say, yeah, I watched it. It was a piece of crap. Or, yeah, it was pretty cool.
Narcissists. Like the two of you.
Yeah, that's right. You're all narcissists. You're like terrified.
But I'm like, the comment's going to be like, William, here you are talking about monopolizing the conversation. You won't fucking shut up the whole time. Like, yeah. Got me. Dead to rights.
Now, please say hello. Do something to let us know that we're not in some kind of weird delusional spiral here. But that would be great. And comment on my house. Anybody wants to buy it, it's for sale. And we'll see you next week. Okay. Bye-bye.